The past few weeks have been nothing short of extraordinary, shocking and horrific events that continue to unfold at a rapid pace. Many are left confused trying to make sense of it all. A few months ago, we had the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran during a visit for the inauguration of Iran's new president. Following that, we saw Mossad orchestrating mass terror attacks in Lebanon, where explosions from pagers and walkie-talkies killed dozens and injured thousands. Next came a massive aerial bombardment by Israel on Lebanon, killing hundreds, including over 50 children. Then the assassination of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah, an operation involving over 80 bombs, including US-made 2,000-pound bunker busters that leveled entire apartment blocks, including killing Nasrallah and his top commanders. It's now claimed that many top-tier Hezbollah commanders have now been killed. And now Israel is carrying out a full-scale ground invasion of southern Lebanon. In the midst of all of this, Muslims around the world are grappling with the questions: will this lead to a full-scale regional war? Is Hezbollah finished after loss of its leaders? What will happen to the Palestinians in Gaza? And should we place our hopes in Iran? The harsh reality is that Hezbollah and Iran have made several critical strategic mistakes. Beginning on October 8th, Hezbollah, with Iran's permission, began targeting Israeli positions in the Sheba Farm region, an area disputed between Lebanon, Syria and Israel. Israel claims it's Syrian land, while Lebanon and Syria agree it belongs to Lebanon. But Israel occupies it with its own forces, and it occupies it as if it has the right to dictate whose ownership it belongs to. Hezbollah's attacks were in response to Hamas actions on October 7th. In retaliation, Israel struck back across the Israeli-Lebanese border. Strangely, Nasrallah declared that he didn't want to escalate into a full-scale conflict, opting instead for limited engagement. Over the past year, we've seen muted back and forth between Hezbollah and Israel, even as Israel has fired 82% more missiles than Hezbollah. That limited back and forth has obviously stopped, with Israel engaging in a full-scale operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah thought at the time it could strike a balance, offering token support for the Palestinian resistance while avoiding provoking Israel into a full-blown war. They believed that showing limited support would be enough to appease Arab sentiment while preventing Israel from launching an all-out offensive against Lebanon. But this half-measure approach turned out to be a grave strategic failure. Israel saw October 7th as an opportunity, its own version of 9/11, to reshape the map of the Middle East, much like the US did with its war on terror after 9/11. Israel's long-term objective has always been to create a greater Israel, and now it's using October 7th as a pretext not only to eliminate Hamas and take control of Gaza, but also to focus on Hezbollah in Lebanon, which it considers a far greater threat than Hamas. With Gaza devastated, an outcome Israel wanted, and as Norman Finkelstein pointed out, was less about rescuing hostages or destroying Hamas, that Israel was less concerned about this, but was more concerned about actually making Gaza unlivable for Palestinians. Israel now, after achieving that, is now turning its attention to Lebanon. Their goal: occupy the region up until the Litani River and create what they call a buffer zone. Hezbollah's limited operation on October 8th allowed Israel to justify now its full-scale assault. While Nasrallah was downplaying the threat of a wider war, Israel was simply biding its time, focusing on Gaza before turning its forces towards Lebanon. Hezbollah had the chance on October the 8th to split Israel's focus, forcing them to fight on two fronts, but they didn't act. Instead, Israel chose the moment and the timing for a full-scale war, leaving Hezbollah caught off guard. Even after the terror attacks using pagers and walkie-talkies, followed by the bombardment in Lebanon, Nasrallah continued to hope for a ceasefire. In fact, it's reported that moments before his assassination, Nasrallah was assured by American diplomats that Israel had agreed to a ceasefire, only for Israel to then assassinate him with US weaponry.
And they told us that Mr. Netanyahu also agreed on the statement that was...
Are you saying Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a ceasefire just moments before he was assassinated?
He agreed, yes. We agreed completely. Lebanon agreed to ceasefire, but consulting with the Hezbollah, the speaker, Mr. Berri, consulted with Hezbollah, and we informed the Americans and the French that what happened. And they told us that Mr. Netanyahu also agreed on the statement that was issued by both presidents.
And what makes this even more astounding is that Netanyahu was in New York attending the United Nations General Assembly when he placed the order to kill Nasrallah. The optics for Netanyahu was clear. He was sending a message. He doesn't care about the international community nor what the United Nations thinks. He will act in any murderous, genocidal way, knowing full well no one will hold him to account. He knows the powerful nations of the West will fully support Israel and have been fully complicit in this genocide that we've seen taking place in Gaza. The assassination of Nasrallah and the pager terror attacks doesn't just weaken Hezbollah, it also weakens Iran. For years, Iran has used Hezbollah, Houthis and even Hamas as strategic assets, believing that they could use these organizations and groups to pressure Israel without actually directly engaging Israel themselves. And Houthis and Hezbollah in particular have been used to pressure and leverage Iranian interests against other Arab states in the region, as we saw how Hezbollah came to the aid of Bashar al-Assad to bring him closer to Iranian interests, as well as to prevent the reemergence of an Islamic alternative to the secular Ba'athist dictatorship in Syria. After the pager terror attacks, which even injured the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon, all Iran could muster was a call to the United Security Council to condemn Israel. Mere words. Even after Israel bombed Lebanon, killing 700 people, Iran was unwilling to protect its allies within the region. Iran's leadership continued, in fact, to focus on diplomacy, seeking to negotiate, while it was in America, nuclear deal with the West and have sanctions lifted. All the while, Israel was continuing to rain bombs on Lebanon after they had obliterated Gaza. The July assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran was a brazen attack, one that only killed Haniyeh and his personal bodyguard in the heart of Iran's capital, Tehran. What was Iran's response? Nothing. It came across as weak, unable to defend its own allies, even in its own capital city of Tehran. Iran's reluctance to retaliate paved the way for Israel escalating aggression. Now, Israel is trying to draw Iran into a broader regional war, hoping US will step in to decimate Iran. If that happens, Israel has always sought to destabilize the region, particularly weakening any potential rivals or threats to its own and Western hegemony within the region. Iran, facing a crisis of confidence not only in its own country but also in Lebanon, then finally responded with missile attacks. But like before, the strikes were limited and short-lived. While they may have included ballistic and hypersonic missiles, it was little more than a PR move to show that they weren't just a paper tiger. This attack was similar to previous actions, whether against Israel in April this year, or even against American bases in Iraq, where Qasem Soleimani, the general, one of the prominent figures of Iran, was assassinated by America. In both cases, Iran had pre-announced the timing after which they had claimed that their operations were now over. Even Trump, who was president at the time of Soleimani's assassination, confirmed that Iran had told them about when and where the attack was going to take place against American bases.
They called us up and they said, listen, we have no choice. We have to hit you because we have our own self-respect. And I understood that. We hit them. They got to do something. We're going to launch 18 missiles at a certain military base that you have. And you remember that night. Interesting night. I was the only one that wasn't nervous because I knew what was going to happen. They told us that don't be concerned, we're going to launch 18 missiles at your military base, but none of them will hit the base.
Although Iran didn't give as much notice to America about its recent attack against Israel, and they did use ballistic missiles, as well as some claiming using hypersonic missiles that they were also used, and even many reports and videos are now coming out claiming that many of these missiles were not intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system, but actually struck Israel. However, make no mistake, this recent attack was about protecting Iran's national interests, trying to regain confidence amongst its supporters. It was not about stopping Israel's assault on Gaza or Lebanon. In fact, the assault on Lebanon is continuing to this day. It hasn't stopped, while at the same time, Iran has said its operation, its missile barrage, is now over. for the time being at least. Iran's support for Hezbollah, the Houthis and Hamas has never been about helping the oppressed, whether that's in Palestine or Lebanon. These groups are strategic assets in Iran's geopolitical game, used to further its interest within the region. For instance, why wouldn't Iran continue the bombardment, help those Muslims in Lebanon, help its own allies Hezbollah in Lebanon, if it was so interested in stopping Israeli aggression and oppression? They are not. Similarly, why did they watch and observe a genocide take place in Gaza while at the same time they were only willing to attack when their own embassy in Syria was attacked? They weren't willing to attack and come to the aid of the Palestinians. They are using these groups and they're using their actions for their own national self-interest. So just as Iran pushed for Hezbollah to prop up Bashar al-Assad for its own interest, and similarly it provided intelligence for America in its invasion of Afghanistan to remove the Taliban in 2001, and it worked in partnership with America in Iraq to clamp down on Sunni insurgencies, then they do these actions not for the welfare of the Ummah, but for their own national selfish interest. There's a history of this. This is what I'm pointing out. Some may point out that Iran is at least doing more than other Muslim countries, but that's really a low bar. Using comparisons of Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, UAE or Saudi is not a comparison and should not be the standard by which we are looking for when we are trying to assess a real response. We should measure them against Islam and what Islam demands, not what other countries have done, with these countries colluding quite clearly and directly with the Zionist entity. No, that's not the criteria. Islam has to be the criteria. Seeking the interest of the Ummah has to be the criteria, not simply doing tokenistic PR-led actions against Israel. So where do we go from here? Iran clearly doesn't want a war with Israel, and America too doesn't want to be dragged in a war with Iran. Iran isn't a country like Afghanistan, nor is it a country like Iraq, which had been ravaged by 10 years of brutal sanctions when it was invaded in 2003. Iran is a strong country. Could Iran then, with the right sincere Islamic leadership, create real change? But really, this isn't just about Iran. There is a broader issue at hand, which is the Muslim world as a whole. Just look at the number of American bases in the region. From a strategic point of view, the Arab and the Muslim world could have ended the invasion of Lebanon, could have prevented the obliteration that we're seeing in Gaza. Turkey, Egypt, UAE, Sudan and Jordan could have reversed their normalization with Israel, no longer recognizing this rogue ethno-supremacist Zionist entity. Turkey could have stopped the oil pipeline serving Israel's energy needs. Egypt could have opened its Rafah borders to supply and aid the Palestinians in Gaza. UAE and Saudi could have closed its airspace to Israeli planes, stops the use of its land as a land bridge to supply Israel with goods, and every one of those Arab countries, Jordan or Qatar or Egypt or Saudi or Kuwait, etc., could have demanded the removal of every single American bases from their own lands. What could America do if these countries said they demand the end of American bases on their own territory? Go to war with every single Muslim country in the region when the same country America lost in Iraq and Afghanistan? What I'm saying is, even without one missile, the Arab and Muslim world could have isolated Israel from the rest of the world, make the entity unworkable and unsustainable. And as we see, many of the Zionists would probably just up and leave and go back to their mother countries of Europe and America. Lebanon wouldn't have been invaded, Gaza wouldn't have been obliterated, and Israel couldn't just simply go around killing and provoking wars throughout the Middle East. Without real leadership, the Muslim world is left fractured and vulnerable. As Muslims, we need to recognize what the real problem is, that our leaders, whether in Iran or Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, are playing political games at the expense of the Ummah. These regimes are out of touch with the people who yearn to support their brothers and sisters in Palestine. The Muslims are horrified that its rulers are wholeheartedly supporting the Zionist crimes against the Muslims. If history tells us anything, it tells us that when rulers become so disconnected, hold such opposite views from their own people, their downfall, these rulers' downfall is inevitable. And I'm 100% certain of this. These rulers' support for Zionism is so stark that no longer are we talking about if they will be removed one day, but when will this occur? The question is, what will replace them? Will it be a system that reflects the beliefs and values of the people of the region, rooted in Islam and unity? Will it be a new leadership that will throw off the yoke of Western hegemony and that will no longer give explicit or tacit support to the genocidal Zionist regime? And inshallah, we will see in our lifetime a civilization rooted in Islam, unifying the Muslims and no longer becoming subservient and slavish to what the West seeks.